thingy, right? I was going the wrong direction.
I know. I realize that it goes the opposite of what you think it is.
Uh-huh. Okay, so let me share this on my page. There we are. And of course, it catches me as I'm sitting down. That's what I can see on here. Like, great. Share to news feed. Ali. Yeah. What's your name on? Why is it not coming up? No, there it is. Okay. What's your name on?
On
Why is
what?
it not coming up? Oh, there it is. Okay. See. Research. What's your name on? You got it on something else too? Oh, there it is. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to share it on my page as well.
What's your name on? Emily. You got it on something else? Oh, there it is. Okay.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to share it on my page as well.
What's your name on? Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay. It should be there. Oh, look at you, got a nice picture behind you.
Oh, my genealogy.
Is that your mom?
Hmm.
Oh, is that your dad too?
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Ifetayo Ojelade, and I am here with a beautiful and wonderful soul, Miss Alethea Bonello, and we are talking about researching your family tree. And I really wanted Alethea to come. Oh, wait a minute. First, if we're going to talk about researching family trees, I have to do this first. So, yesterday was my birthday. Today is the birthday of the person that gave birth to me. It's my mother's birthday.
Oh, wow.
So in October, I always like to celebrate and really focus on things that are all ancestral. So this whole month, that's kind of the theme of everything that we'll be talking about. And so I asked Alethea to come because I wanted to talk about researching your family tree. It has been something that, if you've listened to any of my talks, I think you've probably figured out by now that I have this deep, intense interest in family history and genealogy and really being clear about where you come from. And I love it because we talked about this in the past. And Alethea's family is from the Caribbean, specifically Jamaica. And so sometimes when people are from the Caribbean, they think that they can't find their family tree. As African Americans, we think that we can't find our family tree, and that's not necessarily true. And so I want us to be able to talk about that. So thank you for coming and sharing this space with me, Alethea.
Sure. Glad to be here.
Yay! So tell me about when you first started researching your family tree, and I'll tell you a little bit about mine. When did you first start researching?
Wow, that's a great question. I I guess I got involved really in high school because I didn't grow up with my father's side of the family.
Mhm.
And so I really kind of wanted to know, well, like, who is this other half of me? Like, what is that like? Um, do other people look like me? Or, I was very well versed in my mom's history and my maternal grandparents and everything. And I went back to Jamaica to visit those locations, but I just didn't know about the Bonello side. And so as I became older, I think more so 2008, I had a chance to visit with my great aunt on my father's side, his aunt. And that was a wonderful experience and connected with
Mm.
his family. And so just wanted to find out officially, the records when I was asking questions of people. I mean, I even remember, no, I take it back. I think 1995 was the most pivotal year because that was the year my grandmother passed away.
Mm.
And when we went to Jamaica to the funeral, My great grandmother was still living. We call her Sister Tuntun, but her name is Evelina.
I love that,
And
Sister Tone Tone.
yeah, sister or sister. Most people call her sister, but that was a full name. And so I just started asking sister questions. She was very hardy, still smoked her pipe, walked everywhere she went. And I just sat with her during that time and I started just asking her about her family. And typically, when you ask elders about people in their family, they would say something like, "You're too fast," or "Why you so nosy," or "You don't need to know that, little girl." They would really dismiss you when you
Mm-hmm.
asked, as if you were trying to get into some business or find some gossip, but you really just wanted to know, who are my people. We would joke on that particular mountain or hill that we grew up on. Like, I told my cousins, don't talk to any woman because more than likely you are related to them in some way. And so, in that reality, that people do
Mm-hmm.
marry their cousins or brother or sister because they did not know the lineage. And
Yep.
so, sister didn't have good short-term memory at that time. She was in her late 80s
Mm.
at that point, but her long-term memory was excellent. And
Wow.
through her, I was able to go back 5 generations to her great or great great grandmother. And with the names that she was able to give me, then I could go to other family members and be able to fill in the blanks. But that
Um,
conversation with her over those couple of days was the
mm-hmm.
single most important transference of genealogical knowledge of my family. And even she moved to England with her daughter, my great aunt, but unfortunately, she wasn't able to continue expressing that history to my cousins there. So that is definitely the most pivotal one. And then again, in 2008, when I was able to connect with my father's side,
Mm-hmm.
and I we often joke that people see us and would think that we've known each other forever, but
Wow.
really the connections are very recent, but they're deep. And I love my family. And so I just think it's important to just get to know that history, not only for myself, but for generations to come, because now there is really no one in that generation that has those linkages and can tell those stories. So the last living representative would be my great uncle's wife, Mrs. Myrtle, who's 91, 92 now. But again, when the memory goes, it's difficult to
And
really get
it's,
that information.
yeah. I see Sister Amy is listening. Hey, Sister Amy. And for my other folks that are listening, I'm wondering for you, have you started, researching your family history? When did you start? And like, what are some of the things that you did in order to be able to help you find your family history? So it sounds like Alethea was saying, just talking to elders in the family. I know for myself, I was going to say that it started 15 years ago, but I guess that is not actually true. It started when I was a little girl because I used to sit under the table at my grandparents' house and listen to my grandfather, and he would tell stories, and he would tell stories of his mother. And he was telling me this family history, and I really think that that is what really sparked my interest, because I always felt a connection to his mother, even though I didn't know her, never met her. If I remember correctly, she probably died before I was born. um or I mean, we lived across the country anyway, so I don't think that I ever got to see her. And I thought that that was really interesting, that that's really the first thing that sparked my interest. And then I see Dr. McCrae on here, who says that she researched her family history. So we jump forward. So me being a little kid, listening to my grandfather talk about his mother and talk about his experiences, and I have those like concrete in my head, down to that's how I ended up at an HBCU, is because of my grandfather, because my grandfather went to a HBCU. Then I meet Dr. McCrae years and years later, before she even becomes Dr. McCrae, probably about 15 years ago. We were having this conversation. I remember her being at my house, and then we were preparing for, I had roped her into one of my 50 million schemes. Well, I shouldn't say schemes because that sounds like a negative word. My 50 million projects that I had going on. And we were getting ready to present on the importance of family history. And she was telling me to go on Ancestry.com to look. And she said, well, it's kind of addictive. And I was thinking to myself, addictive? Like, how could your looking for your family history be addictive? And I had already done like a basic family tree of the people that I knew. But then Dr. McCrae told me to open up Ancestry.com. And I put in my grandmother. I didn't know much. I knew my grandparents' names because I knew all four of my grandparents. And I knew, I think, one of my great grandparents. I didn't know much beyond that. And she told me to put in one person's name. And I put that person's name in. And then it went up, and like all of these things open on Ancestry.com. And immediately, almost instantly, I went to the wall of enslavement and I was floored.
Wow.
I was completely floored. People whose names I did not know that were my relatives. And because they came out of enslavement and stayed in the same area, and my grandmother actually, that who I knew, my grandmother actually lived in the house, and my father lived in the house, was the house that my ancestors that came out of enslavement, it was the same house. So my father grew up in the
Wow.
house.
That's
So it was
amazing.
extremely easy to find them because everybody was like boom, 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 boom in this one line.
Mm.
And the next thing I knew, it'd be like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm going through records. And then I was like, oh, that's what she means, that it can be addictive. Like when you start to find your people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then it's so many lines as you go further up.
Hmm.
So it's amazing how to just keep everything together.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
it's addictive.
Hmm.
And just to see, you don't know this person, but you find some type of document, some marriage certificate, some birth certificate with their name on it, and another name, and it's like a crazy rabbit hole. But it's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it's to me it's an amazing feeling. And it reminds me of what you said. And usually when I'm teaching people how to and I'm not a genealogist, so let me just be clear. So when I say I'm teaching people, I'm telling people kind of from my lay knowledge, this is how I was able to find things. And then my teaching is more around like, what do you do with this information? We're going to talk about that today from a psychological standpoint. So when I'm teaching people to find the information, one of the first things that I talk about is like, why is it important to find your ancestors? And you hit the nail on the head because the first thing you said is because I want to know who my people are. And everybody does. And I think that part of what happens in this society is that some of it is like this kind of twisted idea, like kids won't think that that's important, or folks will cut off, family members, and they don't talk to folks, and things like that. You have all these kind of bizarre things that happen in families. And what I know for sure from a psychological standpoint is psychologically healthy people want to know who their folks are. So even if somebody, and I have this in my family, when you have the kind of internal informal adoptions that happen, that are not through the legal system, but one family member takes care of another family member's child, or if you have more formal adoptions that I've had those experiences also. All of that thing, that's nice. Even if that family was wonderful, people will ultimately want to know who their people are. And the kind of the bonus is if you have a good adoptive family, then you got two. You got your adopted
Mhm.
folks, and
Yep.
then you got
And your
your
birthplace.
biological family too. And so I want to kind of jump in and talk about some of the resources that I have used, and I know you've used some too. And again, I think it's important because a lot of times some of the pushback that I get is like, my people will say, well, my folks are from the Caribbean, and I can't find things. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not true. You can't find stuff. So where have you looked? Like, what are some of you, outside of course, we know talking to elders in your family and kind of writing that information down, even if you think it doesn't make sense, write
Mhm.
it down. But aside from that, where else have you looked for information?
So the biggest resource has been the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, and their website, familysearch.org,
Mhm.
has been the single most greatest resource to find actual documents. And so I've found, like I said, birth certificates, marriage certificates, death certificates, and birth certificates are so important because it allows you to have one more name on the rung in terms of the mother and or father, to be able to then research that name to go a little bit further. So there's a actually a Caribbean resource library in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and they do have a online presence as well. Um, and in order to kind of keep everything uh, organized, if you will, electronically, I've used familyecho.org as well as MyHeritage. They actually allow you to restore photos from black and white to color, which is kind of neat. It's not 100% accurate, but it's been helpful as well. So I would say that, as well as whenever I'm a part of a family gathering, I just kind of, have my recorder out and I ask questions of people. And it's amazing the stories, because you'll never get that from a genealogical site, when you get these nuances of how the family was able to help each
Mhm.
other, or who lived with who for a certain period of time, and why that was significant, or why this person's so close to this person, or why this person, we call them cousin and auntie, but they're not blood relatives. So all that information is important, and you do want to record those types of significant relationships as well.
Now it's I got familyecho.org. Family Heritage, is that .com? I've been on Family Heritage.
Oh, you know what? I didn't check that. I
Okay.
think it's myheritage.com.
Oh, it's My Heritage. Okay. I know I've been
Mm-hmm.
on that one before.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so let me tell you a couple of things. I see Carrie saying, yes, help. Her family's from the Caribbean. And so she wants help in that area. And I want to talk about that. And then I want to go back to Sister Amy's comments. So, Sister Amy, if you continue to listen and I skip your comment, I want to come back to your comment about kind of hesitancy, because I think that those are very important things. One of the things that I want you to just begin to think about, and I really kind of put this together last night in my head, and then I was telling, when I was doing supervision with our interns, I was telling them this earlier today, is you have to remember, when it comes to records, a lot of times people of African ancestry, because of transatlantic trade in human beings, we will assume, because of the disruption in our families, we will assume that there aren't records. But when it comes to records, and we'll go specifically back to the first one that you talked about, family search, in a second. But when it comes to records, the type of records, when you think about a marriage certificate, a death certificate, census records, tax records, property records, things like that, most of those records are done for the purposes of being able to count human beings so you can tax them. So if you think about, from a capitalistic system, which all of us live in, regardless of what country that we're from, and if you look at global ideas of global capitalism, the goal is to count human beings so you can extract money from them. Think about it. So if the goal is to count human beings so you can extract money from them, even if you think of them as property, there is going to be a record. So if you shift the way that you think about stuff, if you are in, stop thinking it of like, oh, somebody was keeping track of records for posterity because they really cared about my family. No, I didn't care about your family. They cared about tracking you to extract income from you and your
Wow.
ancestors. So if you think about it that way, then think about all of the ways that the state tracks humans, or even when they dehumanize people into property, what are the ways that the state tracks those things in order to extract income? So again, census records. If you look in the United States, that is also going to be from, they have what they call, quote unquote, non-population schedules. You have censuses. You can look back, historical censuses, if people were incarcerated. There are all kinds of ways. And Dr. McCray, I know you can help me on this one because I know you're listening. There are all kinds of ways that the state is taking track of stuff. So and again, in the tax record, so there's something, school records, christening records. I
Mhm.
found some of my family members. I One of the ways that I found out that I descend in one area, my family, don't ask me how to explain it, these is black people, they were from London. And the way that I know that they are in London is because I can see my great 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 fifth great grandmother, who I can see a recording of her birth and her christening in London, England. So there are tons of ways um, that the state is tracking individuals that you may not necessarily think of. And so, Carrie, going back to your question, even in places in the Caribbean, whether it be Jamaica or Grenada or Barbados or wherever it is, there's sometimes people had property, and so they had to pay taxes on the property, or again on the state census, or there is a small like church record, where someone may be part of a particular parish, and so those parish records. And so that's actually why when we go back to Alethea, when she's talking about going to Family Search. So, Family Search is a really good place to start, because what the Church of Latter day Saints is doing, it's the Mormons, is part of their belief. And I don't want to speak for their belief because I'm not a Mormon, but part of their belief is once you die, if you will meet your family in heaven. And if all of your family is baptized as Mormon, then you all will reunite together in heaven. And so part of their faith system is to focus heavily on genealogy, because they're trying to put together their entire family record. So, and particularly if those people are baptized, so they go throughout the world. They have the largest database in the world, and it's really for their um, parishioners isn't the right word. They're church members, but they open it up to other people. So if you go on Family Search, you will be surprised. And particularly in places like the Caribbean, they've got parish records and tax documents and like Alethea says, marriage and divorce records, and they have the largest database in the world. And
There's
tax documents and like Alethea says, marriage and no. So Alethea is sharing it, so she's got it on.
I was trying to actually respond to a comment, but it won't. It's not letting me.
So familysearch.org is the a good place to start, and it's a place that you can start for free. Here's a couple of things that are just my biases. I don't save my family tree on Family Search, again, because I'm not a Mormon, and just because that, yeah, I'm just not, I don't want to contribute to that. So I will go and look at their records. The challenge with Family Search is that because it's a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter Day Saints, they are not real big on some of the additional things in turn that are needed in terms of searching the records. So you may not be able to fine tune records in terms of searching, in terms of ethnicity, and really kind of breaking things out in ways that might be helpful, because that is not their focus at all. Their focus is for their members and from a different perspective. And so one of the things that you can know, and people always like trip when I say this, I can almost guarantee at least one of your family members is going to be in Family Search, because several of my family members are there. And if they are on that, then they have been baptized according to the Mormon belief system. They have been baptized Mormon. And so then if we had our brothers and sisters in the Jewish community, then there was like a controversy. You can look it up online, where they were baptizing some of the survivors of the Jewish Holocaust in Nazi Germany. And so that was like a big controversy, and they stopped doing that. So they pulled those records out. And there is some effort to actually stop them from collecting some records now. But right now, it is actually one of the best places, and particularly if your folks are from the Caribbean and continent of Africa, think of anything missionaries. So I mean, if you just think about that, missionaries going across the globe, spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, they're recording that. They have records, and so the Mormons are more than likely they have those records for you.
And in addition, I would also say, as we're talking about these different things, we're talking about vital records. So you
Mhm.
could actually go to, for Americans, go to the specific state if you are aware of it, to search vital records. In the Caribbean, you might be able to, and anywhere else, actually, newspapers are also a great resource.
Mhm.
And so, for example, the Jamaica Gleaner, uh, I was looking for, I went to my great aunt's funeral, and all I knew her name was Aunt Bertie. And I'm like, but that's not her government name. But luckily, in the actual obituary, it stated her name, Aunt Bertie, as well as her actual name. So obituaries are also a great source of information. And to be able to look it up in newspapers now, especially that they have an electronic presence, to be able to go ahead and subscribe for the trial or invest and pay the money to be able to go ahead and look through the electronic records as well. Or even microfiche, if you can go to the local community and go to the library as well to look up different newspapers and other recorded documents that might be on microfiche or electronic record.
And so for me, for the first 6 years that I was doing this, I did not pay for anything. So I focused on family search. There for ancestry.com that we'll get to in a second, there are ways that you can access it for free. So if you're going to school, if you're still in school, you're at a university, you can access it for free that way. If you have a library card, so if you got some fines, go pay your fines. You usually will be able to access it through that way. I did that for 6 years, and that really got me far. And so you can do the same thing with newspapers. There's lots of newspaper databases that you can access through local libraries. And so I would start with that before you start investing a lot of money on, doing trips.
Of
Unless
course,
you
yes.
wanted
Free 99 is always best.
I am really good with free 99. So,
Mhm.
like, literally for 6 years, I did that. So, I was still in grad school at the time and I had access to ancestry.com. You cannot save your family tree on that version of it, but I was able to save records. I did. Actually, I can show y'all. I think it's up here. Nope, it's not. Oops, as I'm spilling all
Right, and as
over.
she's searching, if you literally go to the library, local library with your laptop, then you have access to ancestry.com, a little bit more access than you would at home without having to pay. So that is a great resource as well. And just simply asking the reference librarian, like, I'm trying to research my family history. These are the demographics. This is where they come from. Could you provide me some assistance in that way as well? And you can even call if you can't physically go to the library. So as Dr. Ojelade said, there are several free opportunities, complimentary opportunities that you can use. Dr. McCrae is saying obituaries, other news articles, yearbooks. Of course, you can gather some
Yes.
information. And the Black press in the U.S. would often print things about African Americans that seem mundane to us. As she was researching a person, and her question, Dr. Ojelade, is, do you have suggestions on how to research plantations and the owners in Mississippi? Ooh.
We're
And
gonna come to that. We're
interesting
gonna we'll
thing.
go to Miss Amy's question, and then we'll come back to the plantation stuff. Because now,
Awesome.
why you gonna put that can be challenging. Okay, so let me just show you. So this is me the first 6 years. Like, look. So this is like literally a piece. You can't see any of the stuff on
Hmm.
here, but I'm just showing you
Yeah,
that
it's a
this
lot
is just
though.
a piece of what do you call this kind of paper? Like construction paper, but it's just a
Mhm.
big piece of construction paper. And this one literally goes, I don't think we're 7 generations. I think we're 5 generations. So I'm actually past some of this on here. But when I first started out, this is what I did. So I would go to the library, I would access ancestry.com with my laptop for free, and then I would just write the people down on here. And I always had this visual representation of being able to see the people. So I would encourage you, if you just try,
Oh
if you're
yeah. And
whatever.
that, no, now that you say that, I think, was it Family Tree? I can't remember the website now, but I do it electronically because I lose stuff. I'm not
Hmm.
good with paper things, but it allows you to put in certain information about a person. And then I actually printed it out one day. I mean, it's like 30
Oh,
pages worth. But interestingly enough, I took the very same questions that they asked to enter and I sent it to all my relatives. How many people sent it back?
one,
It's
two.
interesting. Zero. But I love y'all still. I love you. And I'm looking for it. Um, the questions as a whole seems a bit intrusive because it's asking about your name, your middle name, your birth date, who you're married to, your children, and it's just
Oh,
like,
those
why
are
do you need all
intrusive
this
questions.
information? But it's so much easier if you can just get it from living people now. So even in your genealogy research, you want to go back to the past. Think about those generations yet unborn. That it's important for you to document and become the family historian slash griot now and be able to get that information documented somewhere and to pass it on to your lineage as well. So,
I totally agree with that. Now, so actually, we'll tie in Miss Amy's question to what you just said. So she was saying she'd been reluctant to research her family history because of trust issues, and so she knows her paternal great grandmother so far, but she's been reluctant to go past that. Now, that's a real thing. That is a
mhm,
real thing because there are a lot of family secrets that can occur. There's a lot of family wounding that happens, and because of the trauma, and I'm talking about kind of a diasporic trauma, and even for continental Africans, the trauma that has happened in our families due to colonization and transatlantic trade in human beings, then we may come from families where people are reluctant to talk, like you said. Then you kind of get feedback of like, oh, you're trying to be in the family business, or there's like drama and controversy. And I've certainly, I just recently ran into that, accidentally ran into some folks that I was not trying to run into in my excitement. I'm like, yay, I can find my family. But sometimes Pookie and Raekwon and them is like, that's why your grandmama and them had cut them off.
mhm.
And so you have to recognize those things. Now, what I am saying is know who your family is, and so you can pass that down. That doesn't mean that you need to. You okay, Alethea? I know Alethea got the allergies going on with this time of year. So it's absolutely okay to you can make choices about whether or not you're going to interact with those people. So like while Alethea is trying to kind of take care of herself, we'll just kind of go on. Because I mean, there's some people that are just not going to be healthy. I just recently spoke with someone, and just in case the person sees this, I won't, blast them all out. But it's somebody that's an actual relative of mine, and I was like, not so much, not so much. We're not gonna do this. We're not okay. So it's nice to know that we're related, but no, 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 no. And that individual came from a lot. Like I knew part of the story of the tragedy that had happened in the family. I didn't know that this person existed. She didn't know that I existed. And as I talked to her, I was like, oh, okay. So I can see the residuals of that trauma, but it doesn't mean that she's not my family member. And so I think it's important for us to have that, because just imagine if we keep the secret and don't tell the future generation, then my kids are going to be running into some problems. And so
Mhm.
I'm not trying to pass that on in the future. Because one of the things, and actually, when I showed you the red chart that I do, one of the reasons why I write everything down there, and even if people had like, I write down their jobs, if they had any particular issues, if there's divorces, if you can see it all in one place, then you can start to see the things that have been passed down in the family generations, passed down in the lines that are not unique to you. So I like to be able to find the information, but I get to make choices with individuals of whether or not I'm going to interact with them.
And that's
So
so powerful. Yeah. Because I think when we talk about family, we feel an obligation that they have to be in our lives and we have to do things for them. And especially if you don't know them, if you don't have a bond with them, you have a choice to create that, but you also have a choice to not engage with them if it's not
yeah,
healthy.
Yeah, and particularly if you realize, I mean, go with your first instinct if you realize that that is not going to be a healthy relationship. I mean, look, the reality is if you're watching this, you know that I'm a doctor, right? So just imagine I'm finding somebody online and figuring out somebody is related to me. I'm not trying to roll up and be like, hey, I'm a psychologist. I live in Atlanta. Da, 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 da. Because the first thing in my mind is, and because I'm from Los Angeles, I'm like, no, I'm not trying to have nobody think that they're about to have a payday because we're related. That's not what's going to happen. And at the same time, I'm thinking that person is going to be suspicious of me. One, because they don't know me, and because they may be thinking the same thing of me. So those relationships, if you choose to build a relationship, I think that is up to you. At the same time, I think you need to know the information and collect the information, names, dates. If there is a disruption in the family, you need to know why that disruption occurred. And and one of the best things to do is to be collecting that information to understand those disruptions. I'll give you and then I'll go to Dr. McCrae's question about the research and plantation records. So I want to kind of talk about more of a historic thing. So my grandmother, who is deceased, is, if you look at her picture, phenotypically, she does not necessarily look in the stereotype of an African American woman. And that's because when I grew up, her mother, she told me that her mother was black, and I have a picture of both of her parents. Her mother was black, her father was white, and they were married. And I tried all my life to try to figure out how in the world in the early 1900s did a white man marry this black woman? Like, not shacking up, but that they were actually legit married in the South. And my grandmother's family did not like her father. And so there was like lots of negative talk about him because he was white man and because all this other kind of stuff. And so she cut him off. And by the time I came along as a little girl, my grandmother's telling me these stories about her father. And she didn't know if her father was still alive. And she really regretted cutting him off when she was in college in her early 20s.
Hmm.
And so my grandmother died, and she never knew what happened to her father again.
Hmm.
And through this process of me looking for my ancestors, I spirit woke me up. That's the only way I can describe it. Spirit ancestors, I don't know, but it wasn't it wasn't just like a typical thing. Woke me up on a Sunday morning, and I knew my grandparents' names, and spirit was like, put your grandparents' name, your grandfather's name in family search. And I put his name in, and for the very first time, I was the first person. My grandmother never even saw this. My father and his siblings did not know this. I found my great grandparents' marriage certificate. And it gives me goosebumps as I even to say it. And I discovered a couple of things. One is that her father was not black. I mean, her father was not white. He was
Right?
They told
What was
her
it?
that her father was white. When you look at my grandmother, you could believe that her father was white. So my grandmother grew up thinking she was biracial, even though she didn't. People didn't use that term biracial at the time. So her entire family told her that her father was white. I see on the birth certificate that he's black. And then as I started researching him more, he blackety black, black, black. He looks white. Even on the, like, if you see the picture of him, he looks like a white man, but he was like, I'm not trying to pass. He had other people in his family that passed, but he was black and he was clear about him being black. And he was from Charleston. And they also told her that he was from a different country. He wasn't from a different country. And I don't know if it was because he had a Charleston accent or whatever. He was from Charleston, and he is the one that I descend from, where his great grandmother came from England, and they were black people that came from England.
Hmm.
And so I really had to think about, like, well, why would my grandmama's family tell her that? Because that bothered her like all her life. And I knew from the birth certificate that her family knew that he was black because my grandmother's grandfather signed, I mean, the birth certificate, the marriage certificate. So he was there, he witnessed it. He witnessed him saying that he was black on the marriage certificate.
Hmm.
And so I knew that there was a story there. I will never know the fullness of the story, but this is why it's important to have marriage certificates. I knew when my grandmama was born. I saw the date on that marriage certificate. I saw the fact that my great grandfather signed for his daughter to get married to this man. And then months, I was like, oh, I see what went down here. She was 19 and she was pregnant. And her daddy was like, oh, we about to fix this.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got married in August and my grandmama was born as a full term baby in December.
Okay.
So then that told me, like, oh, okay, so that's why they didn't like him. And all that controversy happened. But I could just go on. Not just one story, but I could tell you story after story of their controversies and cutoffs and things. And when I'm talking to my aunt about these things, she's always amazed because I can tell her all these pieces, like I can solve all these mysteries about our family, about beefs that people had, and just by looking at records,
Yeah.
tax records, divorce records, marriage records.
It's a soap opera in and of itself, and when you're able to put the pieces together. So you mentioned that you're seeing patterns, you're seeing these different things within the family. And someone talked about patterns and generational curses and generational cycles. And I'm curious if you could talk to us about genograms that psychologists use as it is along with the patterns and seeing the linkages within the family. And what is a genogram, of course?
Right. So a genogram is a family tree, but it has more than just names and birthdays and marriage dates and things like that. So that's where I was saying that I write down what people do. I write down the kinds of relationships that people have, whether those relationships were close or enmeshed or cut off or conflictual. When you start writing those things down, you start to realize that you're not the only person in your family that's been having this particular experience. It's like, for example, and it can be on a good side because I think we focus a lot, and I don't want to focus. I don't want to have us focus on that because there's always this thing of like, oh, we have these family curses, and I'm really honestly, now that I just think about it right now, and this is the ancestral just call. We need to stop saying that because that is the thing that we primarily focus on. You know what? Let's say transgenerational trauma. Our people have gone through a lot. And the fact that we are here and have survived, that means no, that's not a curse. That's a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the psychological and just terroristic horror that we've experienced, the fact that we can be partially clothed in our right mind says a lot. So that whole idea, I don't know. It just feels like I never feel right when people say they have like these generational curses and stuff like that. No, the dysfunction that you're seeing in your family is a dysfunction that happens when people come and snatch up your ancestors and force them to go to another country to work for free and then rape their mamas and kill their daddies. That's what you're seeing.
And I'm looking at it in a different way as well.
Okay.
I think, like you said, when you hear curse, you think, oh, somebody put this on us, we can't do anything about it. Versus if you look at the patterns and their cycles,
Yes.
and oftentimes you don't do what you're taught, you do what you're modeled. And
Yes.
so if you've been modeled this type of behavior in your family, and even as a child, it's funny how we always say, when I grow up, I'm not going to do this way, or I'm not going to act like my parents did. And then yet, years later, you are doing the exact same thing. You're saying the exact same thing because it was taught. It's in you. And so it takes a lot more intention and energy to be able to interrupt the pattern and to be able to create a healthier pattern, even in the way that we treat our children, how we speak to them, especially at a young age, and then wonder why they act a certain way when we don't take ownership of how we've treated them or how we've shown them the things that we thought we would never do in a parent-child relationship.
Yeah. And I'll give you this good example. This is off the subject, but on. So we were walking the other day. Me and my friend were walking, and I saw this man, and everybody's walking their dogs. We're on the belt line. Everybody's walking their dogs, and skating and having a good time. And we see this man with little, everybody got these little puppy dog, little play dogs that they got.
Mhm.
He is walking the dog, and he snatches the dog and look, get your ass over here,
Mm.
like. And I remember saying it, I had to kind of like lower my voice. I was like, so that's how we talking to the dog
Mm. Mm.
now? It was so bizarre. But the first thing that came to my mind is that kind of verbal violence is what he must be used to. And when you're and this is a brother that was doing this. So when we are experiencing or we're used to experiencing transgenerational trauma, we're going to act in ways that are not healthy.
Mm.
And it doesn't mean that we have to continue that cycle.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have to continue it, and it doesn't mean you have to beat up yourself because you're doing unproductive things. That's the thing, like you said, that's the thing that you've been modeled. And so how do you get to do something different? And I think that part of what happens is when you start putting your family tree and you're putting it on one piece of paper, and then you can start to see from generation to generation these things that are happening, these cutoff relationships or these conflictual relationships or these enmeshed relationships or the divorce that keeps happening or the outside children
Mhm.
or men having issues with commitment or women having issues with commitment. When you see those things in a generation, then it takes you outside of that personal ego of this is a me problem, because people get caught up in the thinking that they're so special that this is only happening to them
Mhm.
without recognizing, like, no, this is something that's been passed down to you, boo,
Yeah.
and that you can really have an opportunity to transform it. It also allows you to be able to see when you're looking at a genogram, and so you write down like what everybody does in a family. You've heard me say this before, Alethea. I always thought that all Black women could cook. I just
Mhm.
thought I grew up, everybody around me could cook. I mean, like not kind of cook.
Mm.
And so I just thought that was like a natural thing. And I grew up and I just, kind of was naturally be able to do something. Yesterday, my daughter for my birthday, she made breakfast and she made these biscuits. Y'all do not tell her now. I told her the biscuits was good. The biscuits was almost better than mine, and I was a little salty about it. It was flaky. There was like layers coming off. You know, it's her first time making biscuits.
Oh wow, good job.
Making some biscuits that taste better than mine. But I digress. The whole point is, so what we talk about now is like we can see that both of my grandparents, my grandmothers could cook. One of my grandfathers was a chef. He taught in a culinary program. My great grandmothers that were cooks, so great aunts that were cooks. I come from this long line of people that can cook. So the fact that my child could pull out a recipe for the first time and make some flaky biscuits that's better than mine, not necessarily surprising,
Mhm.
even though I'm a little salty about that. So there's an opportunity to celebrate things that you can see
Mhm.
that are passed down in your family line. And that's what I really want to encourage people to do, is to do your family trees, research your family history so you can see the beauty, the resilience in your family, the way that your family has survived all of these years. I think that that is powerful and important, and those things you have to focus on. I do want to get to the question that Dr. McCrae posed about enslavement.
Mhm.
So, and I'm not an expert on this. I ran into this. So there's a part, and we can do a whole other thing on this, that I do believe that when you begin to look for your ancestors are already looking for you in the
Mhm.
spirit world. So I absolutely believe in the spirit world, the ancestral world. And I believe in it not because I was raised up in it, because I've been very concrete in my life. I believe in it because my ancestors would wake me up and be like, go put something in and go put this name, put our name in this database. And I'm arguing back and forth with myself. I don't feel like it. And I put the name in the database and boom, some information comes up. And I was like, oh crap. And so over the years, I have had concrete evidence that shows me that as I look for them more, they look for me. So that being said, for the vast majority of my family lines, I have one that's a Native American. I have one that was never enslaved. Those are the people that came from England. For whatever reason, they thought it was a groovy idea to move from London, England, to the middle of the transatlantic trade in Charleston, South Carolina, in early 1800s. So I can see my ancestors on the U.S. Census and some of the early census records. Very bizarre, and they weren't enslaved. The rest of my family was enslaved, and so there's a thing called the wall of enslavement. So for most people, if you were enslaved in this country, the first time that your ancestors will show up on a census record with their own names is 1870. So that's usually where people can go, is to the 1870 census. What I knew, so going back to, remember I told you my dad was raised in the house that his great grandparents that were enslaved bought and built after enslavement. So I always knew the plantation that my ancestors in that particular family line, I knew where they were enslaved. So what I did is I started, just like I went back in my family history of enslavement, um, for my own family, what I did one day is I started looking in that particular area. I knew that they were enslaved in North Carolina. I figured they were enslaved in this particular county because they did not move far. And fortunately, the enslavers' last name was unique. And so they were going to have records of a plantation. So I kept looking. And one day last year, I think it was maybe around November or December last year, I was able to finally on ancestry.com, I was able to find the plantation record. And what I found was a will.
Hmm.
And the will listed my maybe fourth, third or fourth great grandfather was listed as property, but his first name was there.
Hmm.
And he, when the plantation owner died, and like it was right before the Civil War started, so maybe like 1859 he died. He included my my great third great grandfather, fourth great grandfather in the will as property, and he was given to somebody else.
Hmm.
So I was able to see him. And fortunately, because the enslaver's last name was unique, my great grandfather's last name was unique. It was easy, well, easy theoretically. Like once I knew where to look, and this took me years, but once I knew where to look, I could tell clearly this was him. And the reason I knew for sure that this was him is because then what I was able to do, so I kept the record. I have a copy of the will, and it's got all these people. And so of course the enslaved Africans, they had first names that were forced upon them, they did not have last names. And I paid attention to who signed the will,
Hmm.
and then I started following those folks. And the person that signed the will, I saw that name as one of my third great
Hmm.
grandmother's last name.
Gotcha.
So I'm still working on that. So I know that there's a connection because her last name is the name of the person that was signed as a witness of the will. And I figured out that they were all like related.
Hmm.
And so then I was able to go into records, and I was able to see, like if you look on the 1850, 1840 census, if there's someone that's an enslaver, his name is going to be listed as mostly men. Well, I shouldn't say it's mostly men because there's a lot of women that were enslavers too. It'll be the enslaver's name that are listed, and all you will see in terms of your foreparents is all you will see is their age. And so you might be able to kind of figure out who your foreparent is based on an age, but I would encourage you to look at the wills. Now, you got to hope that they list the people out in terms of the will, because when I looked at the will before his, so his father, the enslaver's father, what the enslaver's father did is he sold all the enslaved Africans. Like, so there are no names of the enslaved Africans because 100% of them were sold as part of his estate. Um, so, and Jamila that asked the question, I asked her about that. She says, maybe kind of be nice and, well, there's two things that you can do. One is if the person was a big enough enslaver, and the majority of us were not necessarily, our ancestors weren't enslaved with big enough enslavers, that might be the case actually. When I think about it for Jamaica, though, Alethea, is a lot of the enslavers have their records. They had detailed records, and they put their records in archives. And so then you can go search the archives because they're family papers. So what you're looking for is the family papers. You read in the family papers, and the family papers may have your ancestors listed in those family papers as property. They will never be listed as humans. They will be listed as property. So that's one way of doing it.
I haven't gotten that far. I think I'm up to maybe 1888. And I think slavery ended around 1840 something in Jamaica.
Yeah, I
So
know it was earlier than
1800.
US, right? Yeah.
So I haven't had a chance to find that. But another thing, it appears with plantations, you may know your last name was the quote unquote slave name, slave master's name, but the plantation's name has changed over the years. So I'm assuming then you may have to go to the library or the county records or, something about land that may show the evolution of that property so you could actually find where your enslaved ancestors worked.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the part. So, for those that weren't, because I see there's more people on listening now. For those that weren't listening at the beginning, that's the thing that I want you to remember is that all this is around finances, economics, making money for people. And so, if there is a plantation or enslavement work situation where the name of it has changed, that name is going to be part of some kind of legal documentation. And so you will be able to find those legal records. I think what we have to do is encourage our people to look at things from a different perspective because we're if you're white and you go into ancestry.com, you can usually put your family name in and you have all these leaps that pop up. Boo, 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 boo. Like I have one line of my family because there's going to be some Europeans in there. So I can go back to 1200s on that line. Once they scoop, like it's easy. Like the little feathers just open up going back to the 1200s in that particular line. And that's because you got a consistent line of people that are being perceived as human beings. It's not going to be the same for our ancestors because they're perceived as property. And so you're going to be looking for property records. So however people document property, and remember, enslaved Africans are some of the most expensive property that they own. And so the records of bills of sale for enslaved Africans, those things are going to be present for more than likely. You just have to be able to look at it from that particular line. Now, that being said, let me say this, and I know we're we're out of time, but let me just say this. When you start doing that, so how you think I felt? This is a rhetorical question. How you think I felt when I saw my great grandfather listed as property in a will, along with all these other Africans?
A lot of emotions, I'm sure. Angry, sad, just horrified, I mean, to consider that and this isn't just some enslaved African, this is your people that is on a document as listed as property. Yeah. Angry.
And so I think it's important as you begin to do the work, particularly as you, what they would say is kind of pierce the veil of enslavement. Once you start piercing that veil of enslavement, you have to emotionally take care of yourself. Because what I don't want you to do is go run up on somebody and be like, y'all, you find the descendants and be like, y'all enslaved my ancestors, which I can appreciate, but I don't want to. that's not going to be good for you to
Mhm.
do that. So it's really important for you to begin to think about that, of how, when hard stuff comes out, and it will, if you do this long enough. And for those of you that are listening, I'm sure you've run into those situations. It is going to be emotional, and you got to be able to have somebody that you can talk to about that information. I'll give you not too much detail about it, but the most recent thing that I found was, in my historic records, I found people that have passed in my family. It is what it is. I mean, folks just have folks that pass. That's just what they do. And it has been funny, when I found people from the 1830s that were passing. I just thought it was hilarious. Or early 1900s. Thought that was funny, and see that how they're from this family, and then their records change over time. And I was like, all right, you did that. That's you. Where it doesn't become funny is then when you start to see that stuff that's more close to home. So I most recently found that I have a very recent ancestor that's passing. And oh, I guess I didn't tell you this because the way your face looked. You know, I did a lot of crying. Um, it was very, very hard. At first, I was like thinking of it as a psychologist, and I'm like, hey, it's hard to be, at that person's time of coming up, it was hard to be black out in these streets. And so, I was thinking of it from a very intellectual perspective. But then I started thinking about the very real and recent impact, because this isn't a long time ago, um, on my family, on me, that this person has chose to be like, I ain't gonna say the word, that like, screw y'all. And I had to sit with that, and I cried and cried and cried when I realized that piece, and I ran into that information. This person does not want to be called out. So that's the part that I think is important for you to realize, that as you're doing this work, that those things will happen, and you don't have a right. Like, I don't have a right. So that person is doing their thing, and they passing, and they gonna get to pass. I don't get it. It is not my purview. I don't have the right to disrupt that for that person, even though it is very extremely painful, particularly as I am attempting to put together my family line. That's painful. So that's the piece. And kind of going back to what Amy said, that you gotta just recognize that you will pull up stuff. You gonna find relatives, somebody that had an extra baby that they ain't told you about, and it ain't just the daddies that's having extra babies they ain't told you about. You can have women that have extra babies, or extra marriages, or like I said, somebody passing, somebody. I have had in my family some people stealing property, and I can see it, in the court records, of how they was like straight up gangsters stealing property from folks. There's all kinds of stuff to navigate through that. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Um, oh, and okay, so I know we gotta go. So Njamile said she didn't pose a question. Sorry, Njamile, I thought you posed that. That sounded like you were
Yeah, it was
something.
Kenya Luvert who posted.
Let me see. So, but Njamile said, but those property records can be difficult to navigate. Don't forget to consider that enslavers didn't generally assign last names to the people they enslaved. Yeah, they changed enslaved Africans and African Americans' names at will. They sure did. And free people sometimes change their own names. Yes, those are all things that you absolutely have to consider. So things shape shift, and I just feel like I have to do a whole other thing, because there's so much that I didn't get to tell you. I'm going to leave you on kind of a positive note. So I was talking about the pain of realizing these difficult things in my family. One of the things that I realized, yeah, I can't even know, I can't tell you how long ago it was. I started to, I was looking for my grandmother. Again, I was raised with both sides of my family, so I knew my grandmother, and this is my mother's mother. And I kept looking from her for her on the census in Oklahoma when she was a little girl. Couldn't find my grandmama, and so this is the thing that you have to be cautious about is I kept filtering everything because my grandmother has a very common first name, and so I kept filtering for African American and I couldn't find her. And again, got a message. Spirit tells me to wake up, put my grandmama name in. I'm going back and forth. Like, ah, and I have been at this point looking for her for 6 years, could not find her. Wasn't gonna put her name in. Went on and put her name in this particular time, but didn't put any filters. And she popped up on the census for the very first time as I was looking for her. The reason I couldn't find my grandmother is I found out for the first time that my grandmother it was part Native American. Did not know that. And nobody told me that. So, and this is somebody that I knew growing up, and she looked like a black woman to me. So I was very confused. And I remember when I found that out, calling my aunt, who is this is my grandmother, my mother's side. So I called my aunt on my dad's side because there was nobody to ask on my mother's side. And I was like, "Did you know my grandmother was Native American?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, I think I knew that." I was like, "What the? You gotta love your people." But ain't
Mhm.
nobody said nothing to me. But my aunt is like, "Yeah, I think I knew that. I don't think that." She wasn't surprised about it. And so I saw the information and I just honestly, I just kind of buried it away. I told my immediate family, but I didn't tell anybody else. And another 6 years goes by, and I was doing a breathwork ceremony, which is a experience that takes you kind of in a trance state. And in this particular breathwork ceremony, I wake up in quotes because you're wake up in a trance, and I wake up on the Trail of Tears and I see these people walking, and they're my ancestors, and they're kind of beefing with me because they're like, talking. They're talking, and they're like, we're her ancestors too. She can't pretend like we don't exist. It's like, what in the world? And so from that experience, I have been figuring out how to become more settled with this piece of my heritage. And so the more and more I looked at in the records, like I descend from like just straight up Native Americans. I knew my grandmother's from Oklahoma. I had never been there. When I started looking at where she was born in in the capital of the Seminole Nation. So I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
that's interesting. And the more and more I look, when I start like opening the records, I was doing this a couple of weeks ago, and I was sharing it with one of my friends. I mean, they're freedmen. They come freedmen that come out of it is like the Choctaw Nation, Cherokee Nation. They're actually Cherokee, and all of these records exist. And like it ain't just a little bit of people. Like these people were Native Americans, and that's been pretty powerful. Because I think it's an example of like even when you try to hide out, when you try to pretend like they don't exist, they'll be like, knock on the door, lady, excuse me. It's cute. You got like the African name, you wear all the African clothes and the jewelry and all that other kind of stuff. We're still your ancestors. You're not gonna pretend like we don't exist. And they consistently like force me to look at that. So I'm constantly in ancestry.com, and I am just amazed because I mean you can't even deny it with my family. Like when you open the records, it's like, yep, they sure was descended from Native Americans.
So how do you keep it going in terms of your daughters and this history that you're finding?
So, the funny thing is that I don't have to force it. I think it's something ancestral. So part of the thing with me is that I know I descend from folks that are like ancestral people that like historically, even my last name, Ojelade, is someone who's initiated to the Ancestor Society. So um, I naturally, so remember I told you at the beginning, I naturally had an interest. My grandfather was telling me these stories, and I naturally had an interest. So my daughter naturally has an interest. I never force her to do anything. She'll be like remembering the family tree in her name. She's always asking me questions about the family tree. She has just an interest. Since she was a teeny tiny girl, she's had an interest. And so she's going to be the history keeper because that is what she does. That's what she's interested in. So I would say identify the person in your family that has the interest. Don't try to force it on someone. And be okay if they don't have an early interest
Mhm.
in it. Yeah. So you keep the records. Somebody is going to have an interest ultimately because the bottom line is every single person wants to know who their people is. Everybody want to know who their people is. Who did I come from? What was my people doing? So you got other closing thoughts? When I
No,
think
this is
elders want
great. I
to
think, family is a heritage and a blessing, and it's important, yeah, to know who you are, to know them, but also to help to inform who you are, you know. And so, yeah, thank you for inviting me on today. I really enjoyed it.
No, thank you for sharing this time with me. I really like talking about finding your family tree. I'm going to continue to try to, bring stuff I've been looking for. So if y'all out there, someone that's like an African American genealogist that particularly specializes in getting past the wall of enslavement, because I think it's easier in air quotes to get to 1870, but once you try to hit before that, then it can be a challenge. Even Alethea, in the Caribbean islands. In Jamaica, I'm assuming lots of what do you call those the plantation owners that are not absentee plantation owners. Was there a lot? Was that primarily?
I'm sure they were. Yeah, they brought in overseers, and because of the climate, they would go back and forth. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
So
we
I
call them great halls,
what a great host.
the plantations. So Rose Hall, where my mom is from, is Langley Hall. Yeah, but then
Enslavement camps. So where the enslavement camps were.
right.
If there was an overseer, I would assume that they had to, if they had an absentee landlord, that they would have to send a report.
Hmm.
So seeing if you can find those reports.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's gonna be an archive or something. Like
Hmm.
don't it's when people are dead wrong, and use a contemporary example, the Nazis in Nazi Germany, they documented what they did.
Hmm.
They thoroughly documented that evil.
Yeah.
And when you think about enslavement, it is documented. You just got to know where to look. So archives is definitely a place to look for those kinds of things.
And actually, in terms of a closing thought,
Hmm.
it gets really tricky because of the Christian mindset that if you weren't married to, if the mother wasn't married to the father's name doesn't appear on the birth certificate. And so the child is registered in the mother's maiden name. And so when you don't know the maiden name, it gets a little bit trickier in order to continue to find ancestors as you go up.
And yes, and what I will say again is when you begin to look, your ancestors are looking for you. And so then they will help you in very atypical ways. You will, on a Sunday morning, I've had that happen multiple times. On a Sunday morning, you will be woken up and you have this intense urge, go put this name in, or an intense urge to go to a particular place. Or for Ancestry.com, at this point, I pay for it. And with that, I keep I keep thinking, oh, I'm going to stop paying for it because I've gotten everything that I can get from it. And then I won't look at it for a long time. And then all of a sudden, and it's on my phone and on my computer, all of a sudden I'll just have this urge, open Ancestry.com. And 3 weeks ago, I had one of those urges, open Ancestry.com. This is a perfect example. I opened it. I put in my grandmother's brother's name, who I never like looked for his family. He died in the 70s, and I was a little kid. I don't remember him. I'm sure I met him, but I just don't remember him at all. And so I decided put his name in, and I look at other people's family trees, and a lot of times the family trees are wrong, so I ignore them. This one particular family tree was right, and I decided something said send the person who did this family tree, send them an email. And I never do that because I told you I don't trust with meeting people online. It just feels uncomfortable and feels unsafe for me. But I had this urging, send her an email. I sent her an email, and it happened to be my second cousin. This is my grandmother's brother's grandchild. So
Oh,
siblings, grandchildren, granddaughters found each other, and we didn't know each other existed.
wow, that's awesome.
Then so that's what I'm saying is I don't I want to respect the idea of there can be challenges if you don't know last names. Like, sometimes we talk about one of our staff members who's Ethiopian, and the way that Ethiopian naming happens, your last name is your father's first name. So it's a very different system than the Western system. And so people will dismiss that as like impossible to be able to kind of trace family history. Your ancestors are looking for you. So you will have this urge to do something. And if you follow your first mind with that thing, that's the thing that can open up, that will give you the answer that you didn't realize that you had. At the same time, on the other hand, what can happen is, so I did that and that worked out so beautiful. And as a result of that, I got a picture of my great grandparents who I never thought I would see. I
Mm.
never.
That
Mm,
is so beautiful. As
I
you're
got
enjoying that moment,
it.
Amy mentioned that she is having her first grandchild. Congratulations. And I just
Yay!
want to encourage that a grandparent's position in the family is that of the cultural bearer. You know, the parents are there to raise the child, to instill so much in them, but it is the grandparents are the ones that tells the story of long ago, to help that child feel connected. And so I encourage you to definitely share the stories. As you said, you're being stretched to reconcile with the ancestors and those that came before you, but it's important to do so so you can be able to share that story with your grandchild and those to come after you. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, y'all keep looking for your family. And I did that and that was great. And then the day after is when I ran into the person earlier that I was like, whoo, okay, time out. So you get to make a choice. You can find the people, but you get to make a choice of whether or not you interact with them. You do not have to interact with people just because they are your family members if they are not well. So that
and
being
and you bring up a great point. Also on Family Search, there are people who have created family trees that may be linked to yours. So reach out to them. I mean, it doesn't hurt to at least reach out. And if it doesn't feel right, then you can go ahead and disconnect. But yes, it's amazing now that we have the internet and we are global, that we can communicate with other people who are also searching for the same family tree. So,
Well, and I would say is like make sure with those trees that the information is correct,
mhm.
because a lot of times people are I think they're excited and they're not necessarily opening up records and looking
Right,
at them very clearly, and so
right.
the information is incorrect. So you don't want to just be randomly reaching out to folks, and definitely reach out. If you're going to reach out like on ancestry.com, you can reach out to that person within ancestry.com. Do not reach out from your personal email, things like that. I think that that is unsafe. Like you got to really be careful with those kinds of things. But I think it's an amazing journey. You can really get a lot of information as you start to find your family members, pass down information. Um, and it's also a healing opportunity. We're going to talk more about that in another session, but y'all come back. So this whole month we're going to be talking about just different aspects of looking at your ancestry. So you take care, okay? Thank you,
Thank
Alethea.
you. Have a great weekend.